Hello, my little wine introverts. Welcome back to Introvert Wine Podcast by Xenia. This is still me, and this is episode 8 called Modern Georgia. Georgia is a very special and unique place for me. I think that my more or less first experience with harvest and zooming the winemaking happened in Georgia in 2018. So I had this beautiful introduction to waking up at 4 a.m. to harvest some real cool Saperavi grapes and then kind of witnessing the start of the winemaking process. And I feel like all your firsts stayed with you for a very long period of time. And I did go to Georgia before and after that experience. And every time I definitely fall more and more in love with this country. So I wanted to share, my love for Georgia as well through this podcast episode. And I also felt that having somebody who knows way more about Georgia and Georgian wine and can also shed some light on what are the trends, what are the historical milestones, and maybe what are the important events you should know, the varieties, so everything that is hot about Georgia now. So I invited Dariko Kholodilina, who will be our guide and expert on Georgia during this episode, and I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. Very well, welcome to Dariko. Thank you for joining us. Could you please tell us a little bit about your background, your career in wine, and maybe your current occupation and projects?
I work under the cozy name that I got in Georgia, which is Dariko, and I run a wine blog that is called Dariko Drinks Wine on Instagram and YouTube. Also, I organize wine tours in Georgia as a Trails and Wines. It's our family project with my husband. Education at Khetsuriani Sommelier School in Tbilisi, which is also quite exciting for me. I'm also the co-author of Vinologue Wine Guide to Georgia. And after this, basically that was a very important point in my career, after which I realized that I need to do more wine education. I need to kind of collect a bit of like all the spins and also kind of get more credentials and get more information, because even though Georgia is a very exciting country, very old wine country to live in, I still needed the international context. So I would say first I started with Georgian wine, and then once I made it to the international sphere, then I kind of felt the need to go bigger and study more. And now I'm ready to spread the knowledge. So it's a very long story short.
Very cool. Thank you so much. I imagine everybody who is probably listening to this podcast or loves or studies wine knows about Georgia as a wine producing country, because in every wine fair you go, there will be this huge sign with 8,000 vintages of Georgian wine, which is a great branding. But maybe we can try with you to summarize and maybe define kind of different stages of development of Georgian winemaker from this 8,000 vintages to more current times, because there were different stages and I imagine they vary greatly from one to another.
Of course, still very new development. The old castles and the fossilized peeps, they were made in the 80s and 90s as well. But the most modern research, and like this research group led by Patrick McGovern, they stated that it's not just very old, it's exactly around 8,000 years. This archaeological evidence. And that was just a brilliant way for Georgia to start marketing it, I guess. And it's something that we are really proud of. So basically, if we put it as a timeline, around 8,000 years ago, there were some primary people, and they realized that not only some fermented fruit, among them grapes, make some drink that makes people more joyful and kind of increases their mood. They also realized that these grapes, some grapes are better than the others, and they started domesticating them. They started selecting the best ones and planting them together. So that's where the primary selection of some old ancient grape varieties happened. And also they came up with the idea to ferment it in the clay jars. The ground forests were used for stone and for like jugs. You can see the wine serving places just stocked under the table. So they were used for serving, and Georgian vessels were used for fermenting wine and for storing it afterwards. This method is alive till now, and this is also one of the major points to know about Georgia. So it's not something that we use only kind of for promotional purposes. It's something that people actually make till now, and not only on the commercial level. It's something that probably every second family at least makes. It's something very special. It's something that Georgian people like to say that it's in their DNA. So of course we didn't discover some for winemaking, but it's a big part of the culture. And it's also something that helped Georgians transmit their values through the centuries, because wine was also an essential part of the country. They accepted Christianity as a state religion in the 4th century. Wine was always a part of the sacred rituals, and even, well, it's very big fast forward, but when the Christian religion was banned in the Soviet times, some people would baptize children secretly in the wine cellars. So wine cellar was always a very sacred place. And when I say wine cellar, I don't mean only the place where you store the bottle. It's the place basically where you make wine. So many houses in the countryside would have this underground space used for winemaking, for fermenting wine in qvevris. Or now, of course, it's a bit easier to do it in stainless steel, so some people do it like that. My family is not an exception. We also, like, I also make some garage wine in the stainless, not in qvevri yet, but it would be interesting to work with qvevri too. So between this very ancient winemaking and then nowadays, there were also stages when the local nobility decided to improve the level of quality, being inspired by France, obviously. So in the late 18th, early 19th century, people like Alexander Cherchavadze, Ivan Nemolny, the know-how, equipment, the people who worked in the winery, the consultants employed the consultants to develop this so-called European winemaking in Georgia, European style. And that's the term that is also quite widely used now, because local people separate like this Georgian traditional style, this contact wines made in qvevri, and this light classical tradition, like classical style that we know from all the countries of the world. Of course, the amount of wine was a priority, because there are brands like Soviet champagne were used, and Georgia was one of the centers. Sparkling wine that was affordable and available to everybody. A lot of course the weather conditions or any other external factors. Because of that, the scale of falsification was also quite big, because sometimes when the vintage is bad, you cannot just physically produce the amount of wine that is needed, but sometimes you would be responsible with your own life for that and your career and the life of your family. So you needed to do something, and that's how a lot of adulterated wines appeared on the market as well. Then in the 90s, Georgia faced civil war first. There was also they were very dark times, and it was like making wine, high quality wine, was not a priority. Plus, people had genuine mistrust towards the big wine producers, because they knew that kind of factory produced wine was not good because of this adulteration. Then that's how, again, this kind of home winemaking. And only in 1997, Teliani, one of the biggest producers nowadays, was established basically on the ruins of the Soviet facility, winemaking facility established by friends who had some money to invest and some knowledge to employ. And later, in the late 90s, early 2000s, more and more big companies emerged. And also around 2006, also small wineries started coming up with the bottled product they present. It was also the time when Russian embargo happened to Georgia. Because of political reasons, the wines were banned. And as Russia was still a big market for Georgian wine, they had to come up with the new ideas. And apparently, American market, European market, Asian market, they didn't really want this kind of red semi-sweet wine that was demanded on the Russian market. So they had to diversify the product, increase the quality. And now I think Georgian wine, of course, there is always space to grow, but it's available in many countries of Europe, in many states of the United States, in Canada, in Japan, in South Korea, in China. And actually, so yeah, that's exciting times to live and work in Georgian wine now, because we can see that exports are growing and there are more and more new producers that want to try things and make not only the standardized type of wine. So it's very, very interesting.
About the Soviet Union breakdown, because I have these conversations with the producers in Kazakhstan, in Ukraine, in Moldova, that yes, it was devastating as an economic crisis in the 90s to have it shattered maybe at one moment. And of course, for many years, the winemaking was maybe struggling a lot as an agricultural industry. But what have come out of that in terms of quality, because we know, I imagine, that the Soviet Union was heavily focused on quantities and not the quality of the grapes, and was a lot of table grapes production as well. So I have heard from many producers here in Kazakhstan, as also in Ukraine, that what have come out of this in terms of quality of them was a very difficult process, but now they may be grateful that it has happened, because now they're kind of reinventing their winemaking and not relying on the mass production of the Soviet times. Do you feel the same in Georgia? Is it also your kind of feeling and perception?
Yeah, I think it's basically the same sentiment. So many people don't like it, but many Georgians consider Soviet Union period as kind of occupation period, because they were always into being by themselves, like living peacefully with neighbors, but being by themselves. And that's why kind of to be forced into certain type of big system and grow the grapes, like only, I don't know, like the grapes that would perform well everywhere, and kind of abandon the vineyards that were challenging to work on with tractor and so on. So it was all causing a lot of repulsion among the people who worked in wine. However, of course, it also gave the opportunity to certain people, like not certain people, like to people from the villages to work at the big factories and gain experience. However, this generation is almost done now. So yeah, for example, there is a famous winery, Baya's Wine. It's run by three siblings, Baya, Gvansa, and Georgi. And they are all in their, I think, almost hitting 30, so they're very young. And their grandfather just passed away recently. So Bondor Valadze, he was one of the prominent winemakers in their region, and he was witnessing the building of the first wine factory as a teenager, and then he started working there, and he became a big winemaker there, and he taught his grandchildren this craft. So there are these people who build a very good career there. Of course, it didn't work out so well in the end, and the system basically was this. The system was not working well. So of course, if the facilities would be where the vineyards are, it would be nice. But there was a lot of bulk wine that traveled a lot, not only across the one country, but across several Soviet republics, because like they would harvest grape in one place, then make wine in another place, and then age it, and it was decreasing in the process. Wines that were taken better care of, like Massandra, for example, they were just good. So the wines that were meant to be aged.
What would you describe maybe as an image of the Georgian wines now on the international arena? Like, are there the expensive, sought after, natural, rare wines? Or is it mass market wines that are still present, like in Russia, Kazakhstan, I'm sure? So what is the image that Georgia wants to translate to the world about their wines?
I guess Georgia wants to be present with the message of this uniqueness and ancient techniques and unique grapes as well, because Georgia has more than 500 endemic grape varieties. Around 30 of them are used in the winemaking. So basically, it can be associated with countries like Greece or even Italy that work with their own grapes and not only with Cabernets and Chardonnays. So we want to promote our uniqueness. Bulk is not allowed. It's not allowed to export bulk wine in Georgia. So even the mass market companies, they sell wine, the bottled wine. maybe the quality is always good. Yeah. Basically, they occupy places on the shelves and in the people's minds. They say, okay, Georgia, it's not a state, it's a country. They do different stuff. They have different grapes. And then, of course, the smaller companies emerged and they get distributed to probably different places, different type of restaurants. But they already arrived there and people have heard about the country from because of other companies. So I think it's a nice symbiosis of big and small, and also the big companies are producing more and more wine in qvevri because I think it's also a very good selling point for them, and that's why they don't concentrate solely on just like stainless steel and just some mediocre quality. So they like Teliani again. I mentioned them quite often. They have very premium line. It's called Glehuri, and they are much better than the Teliani wines that you can see in the supermarket. They also have a very good line called Wine People, and I think it's an excellent project because they come up with the topic, for example, wines from Tbilisi region, because Tbilisi region is an emerging Georgian wine appellation, and there are a lot of small producers that don't have marketing budget, but they have excellent wines. So they tasted them and they bought some wine from these producers. They bottled them like under their names, but it's a part of Wine People by Teliani line. So these people get exposure. They sold some wine just instantly, and it's kind of marketed under one umbrella. So this kind of project, they are very cool, and that's how the big wineries help small. That we have, they do a lot. They help their members to promote their wines on the target markets, and they're pushing forward. They have their connections in France, in the States, in the UK, and they kind of manage to do their own thing without relying on the big players, because natural wine is still quite a separate world.
You've mentioned uniqueness as one of the traits and qvevri multiple times. Maybe we can briefly explain what is the process of qvevri winemaking.
Of course, I keep talking about it all the time, that some people associate this amber wine or orange wine with qvevri automatically, but it's not. Orange wine and amber wine, we don't like, you can make it in the stainless steel too. It depends on the skins of the grapes that are participating in the fermentation process. So it's basically like when you make red wine, many amber wines are also fermented, like made in qvevri, but it doesn't mean that they are equal. And also you can make white wine in qvevri as well. So like you just ferment white grape juice in qvevri and you get white qvevri wine that is not amber, that is just qvevri wine. So it's not on the legislative level, it's not yet regulated, but in fact, I mean, it's just like simple, basically science how you make it. So you can make white qvevri wine and amber qvevri wine, and also like classical white wine and amber wine made in stainless. But you cannot, you don't see it, you rarely see it on the label. So this is one thing to know. And in general, how qvevri works. So like once we think about amphoras, I guess they're also slightly longer. Qvevri is more like egg-shaped, like this, has slightly like chubbier sides. Once you press, sometimes you crush, sometimes you press the grapes. It's also dependent on the winemaker. Sometimes they just crush the grapes and put all the must, so the juice and the skins, to qvevri, and it ferments there. And then under the gravity force, all the skins and pips go down, and pips they start down first, and they are collected in this very, like this cone-shaped end of qvevri, and then also the skins float down. And first of all, basically the upper fraction of wine is crystal clear, because kind of natural filtration is happening. And also the skin contact is also it goes in a slower way, and somehow it doesn't need heavy punch downs. So like the color and tannins are released slower, and the wine is not so aggressive in the end. However, of course, some winemakers do punch down a lot because they are unexperienced. But from what I realized, basically many winemakers do punch down only a couple of times a day, so that the upper part of the skins will be wet, moist, and will not get dry and not prevent the oxygen from getting in. But otherwise, it's just natural process going in qvevri. And once the fermentation is over, the alcoholic fermentation, they seal the qvevri with wet clay, and usually it's It's the glass lid, and it's there for like 6 months. The wine going through the malolactic almost always, and just sitting there till it gets opened, like getting filtered slowly till it gets opened in like April, May. Once you open the qvevri, you have to transfer wine to the other vessel. Quite often it's stainless steel because the winemaker doesn't. Many small winemakers don't have the capacity to have a lot of qvevris also for storage, so they use stainless. So they transfer it to stainless, and then the grape skins are getting distilled. In case of red wine, the grapes spend on skin only 1 month. So after the alcoholic fermentation, the skins are taken out and getting distilled in winter. So that's how you get like winter chacha or winter grappa kind of. And then red wine spends time in a stainless or in a smaller qvevri through the winter to also kind of develop better. So we don't really have this young one. It's only gone through alcoholic fermentation and people are happily getting drunk. So we don't have this. But we have a new wine festival in May, usually, when some new releases are presented.
I wonder if, in your experience, is it only the local varieties are kind of more suitable for qvevri, or you can also use the international grapes? And do you know of such experiments? And what do the winemakers want to achieve, or what is their opinion on working, if they have, with international grapes in qvevri?
All right. So the white grapes, there are not so many experiments with white grapes. So some people work with Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, but they make them white just because they like the varieties and they feel like working with them. Also, aligoté, out of all things, aligoté. But there are a couple of cases when the red international varieties work quite well in qvevri. My favorite case is Marani Milorauli in Cajeti. It's a small family-run winery, and they have traditional grape varieties too. But Sandro Milorava, the winemaker, works with Montepulciano, Syrah, and Tempranillo. And also he had some batches of Cabernet. And he really likes how they come up because of this micro-oxidation. They kind of develop slightly faster, but he also ages them later in the French oak, in the used French oak, just to soften the tannin, not to give it flavors as well. So it's an interesting approach of combining both. Also, there are a couple of wineries that make like also some Cabernet and Pinot Noir. It's interesting, but I think qvevri would suit rather to this like more powerful and full-bodied varieties like Italian wines, for example, like Italian varieties. Yeah.
And how do you feel this rise of popularity of qvevri, this trend? Is it still with us? Is it going down? Is it going up? Are people still excited to see qvevri? Oh, both.
Yeah, always. Still not so popular. It's like, I mean, people also still excited to see barrels, for example, if there are like first-time travelers in Rioja or wherever, like they would be like, oh my God, this is wine cellar. So it's the same qvevri. And well, once you are in the qvevri wine cellar, you see only the necks on the floor because the rest is under the ground. But I also like on my wine tours, I like to organize the visits to qvevri makers workshop. And I forgot to say that qvevri is always handmade. So there were attempts to print it on 3D printer, and now the experiments are going on to see how it will perform. But otherwise, it's always a handmade product, and it's nice to see how it's built because it takes time. Like in order to build, usually they're building like 8 qvevris at the same time. In order to finish those 8 and sell them, it takes around 2 months. And
it's also difficult to transport them because they're very fragile as far as I understand. So you cannot ship them. Well, you can, but it will be extremely difficult and very expensive. So they're built already on the site, if I'm correct, where they will be buried. Is this the case?
No, they are built workshop and then they are getting transported where the one, depending on the weather, and then they're getting cooled also slowly so that they will not get cracked, and after that they can be transported. There are cases of Georgian qvevris in Japan, and of course like Gravner in Uli. There are Georgian qvevris traveling abroad as well and participating in some exciting winemaking experiments.
Do you feel the same, that a lot of qvevri production is made by older generation and there are not a lot of younger people interested because it's such a heavy manual job to kind of learn and continue this craft?
No, not at all. So young people are actually very excited about qvevri, and I cannot say that it's something generational.
Do you, because now that you've explained the qvevri more in details to me, I understand that you can make very different wines in qvevri, so it's more like the aging and production vessel rather than a technology. I've also tasted Georgian sparkling wines, for example, but I imagine they cannot be done in qvevri in this case.
Well, yes and no. Because many people actually recently started making pet nuts, and this is a big trend, also in natural wine, and they ferment wine in qvevri, and then they bother the fermentation is over, and basically this is pet nut from qvevri.
Actually, what I wanted to ask is about the hospitality, wine service, and sommelier profession in Georgia. Is there a demand for sommeliers? Is it a separate position? Is it trendy? So what's happening in this regard in Georgia? Because I understand that we need to think about Tbilisi and the rest of Georgia maybe separately. But again, in your experience teaching in a sommelier school, do you feel that there is an increase of interest for working in wine?
Definitely, I can say that there is the increase in interest to the profession. However, not everybody comes to sommelier courses being aware of what it is, or some people are still confusing. Like, for example, they would ask me, like, are you a sommelier? But I'm not, because I'm not working in this service. I'm a wine educator. And I can organize events and tours, but I'm not a sommelier. But people think that sommelier is automatically a person that is very knowledgeable about wine. And then they kind of miss the service part on the kind of mental map. And then they come to the classroom, and then they realize that it's basically a huge part of the job is actually service, and some of them are probably getting scared. But in the restaurant, I wouldn't say that each restaurant has a sommelier nowadays, and that's unfortunate because I'm not sure. I don't want to be kind of too critical or something. Maybe I don't understand the context, but I would say that staff is underpaid and quite often, and many restaurants don't unfortunately understand the importance of the sommelier position. They think it's kind of the glorified waiter or something, but they are, for example, usually not saving money on chefs. So they can invite a famous chef, but then the wine can be offered by a regular waiter that is not necessarily trained. To be honest, also to work as a waiter in Georgia is not a prestigious job. It's quite often it's young people that want to make money or earn money for university and so on, but they don't want to make a career because, again, you cannot see yourself making a career and earning a living by working as a sommelier or a waiter. However, there are some really brilliant Georgian sommeliers that are that are changing the market by the quality of service they provide, by their knowledge, and also by the fact that they demand to be paid well. And that's how also, like, what is important to get the attitude changed. Like, people should appreciate sommeliers more, I guess. And also at our school, yes, of course, we tried also to encourage people to work on themselves and also to demand decent money for the service. But the sommelier school I work at, we don't provide only the sommelier trainings and courses. We also do WSET and also do some local Georgian courses. So it's a lot of things going on at the moment.
But I mean, I feel it's more or less the same trend in all the post-Soviet countries because the service was never regarded as a high-paid or premium profession. But I feel that there are changes, and hopefully with some time, it's going to be more prestige and more interesting. I wanted also to ask, because I'm curious, so you've mentioned some of wine events already. What would you recommend to people who are interested specifically in the wine side of Georgia and wine events? When would be the best time to come, and to what wine events you actually advise people to come and kind of visit them specifically?
Well, before our conversation today, I was actually creating a tour for the next year, exactly for the time when the wine festival concentration is even a bit overwhelming, which is the beginning of May. So usually we have a natural wine festival 2 day long during the first weekend of May. Then the next weekend is also like there is one minor natural wine fair, then there is a big new wine festival, and then there is also again a small natural wine salon. And it's usually the time when also the wine importers are coming to Georgia, and it's a lot of things going on. Also in October we have quite a lot of wine festivals because rather than municipal ones, so they're slightly more like public oriented, if you know what I mean. So they are less about tasting, they're more about like drinking. And having fun. Yes, exactly. Also in November, the same team that does the new wine festival, they also organize a festival that supports small wineries, emerging wineries, so wineries that are less than 5 years old, and they provide them with the platform to showcase the product. Then in December, we have a sparkling wine festival. However, to dismay of people with finer taste, the last year was basically a pet nut festival. So there were not many classical and traditional winery wines, but still it was a lot of fun. So yeah, also in June, there is Wine Expo. That is also major event for importers in the beginning of June. Then in the end of June, there is Supernatural Wine Festival. That is basically a wine rave. It's a lot of fun, but yeah, for importers, it's probably, again, not importer oriented, but consumer oriented. Yeah, so those are main things that happen. And yeah, but the thing with May festivals is that it's hard to get to certain wineries during that period because they host importers, and this is of course very crucial for them to secure the shipments abroad, and that's why it's the priority. So usually if I'm selling tours during this period, I rather include the visits to the festival so that people can taste the variety, but then I have to pick the winemakers that are not participating at Zero Compromise or New Wine Festival because, for example, because they don't work in completely natural style, if they are not so new, and they don't want to present their wines at New Wine Festival. So I need to be flexible in that period, but it's always a lot of fun to visit.
No, sounds very exciting. And well, last but not the least, I'm curious if we're speaking, because we're in the middle of summer, what are the top 3 wines of this week for you? What is the selection of Dariko this week to taste from Georgia?
Oh, I have to think now of the countries where, of the demographics that is listening to us now. Hello, guys. I hope that you will have the access to some of these Georgian wines.
Or maybe they will demand this wine, so it's even better from their wine boutiques.
All right. So my favorite grape varieties at the moment are Gorulim Tsvane and Kahurim Tsvane. So when they're made in the white style, they're very light and quite floral. Kahurim Tsvane is also a bit on the kind of this tropical side, and once they're amber, they have Kahurim Tsvane has all this like lovely apricots and candied pineapple and stuff like that, and Gorulim Tsvane is more on the kind of peachy side. So that's very interesting and versatile varieties. So I'm thinking probably a summer version. Then Gorulim Tsvane from Villa Mosavali. I think they would have some importers abroad. Then Kahurim Tsvane, probably by Vazisubani estate. They are also quite big and available abroad. And also the kind of darling of international wine drinkers is Kisi variety. Let me maybe recommend the amber Kisi to people because some amber Kisis can be light. So maybe by Milorava winery I mentioned, or by Dakishvili. Yeah, Dakishvili will be definitely available in many countries. So yeah, Kisi by Dakishvili then.
Okay. Perfect. So thank you so much for this very educational, very exciting talk. I I have picked up some details for me to kind of explore more on the Georgian wine. Thank you so much for being with us, Dariko.
Thank you so much for attention, and I hope that I will welcome you in Georgia one day and we will taste a lot of wines together.
Well, that was it for today's episode on Georgia. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I think that doesn't happen to me very often. I feel like maybe that's one of the few cases that I have a faster speaker than I am myself. And I feel like it gives a lot of dynamics and kind of speed and passion to this episode. And I hope you also picked up on a few things that you should definitely try or taste in Georgian wine. And if you haven't been to Georgia yet, I'm still shocked why you didn't do it, because I feel like it's a paradise. If you're into wine and gastronomy, that's definitely should be on your radar to go explore Georgia. So maybe that's your call to action, especially with this beautiful list of wine events and different wineries and wines to taste that Dariko gave us. And I really hope you can now spell or pronounce Garuri or Gahuri Nswane and Kisi. And I'm very excited about this episode. So please like, share, subscribe, as you always do, to spread the love of wine. We'll be coming back in a couple of weeks with a new episode. For now, cheers and bye.